Welcome to the HERHealth podcast, transforming health for women and girls at risk, where we empower women and girls to take charge of their health and well-being. Join us as we shine a spotlight on issues affecting women and girls' health and explore ways to create positive change. Get ready to be inspired and empowered as we discuss health, advocacy, and empowerment for women and girls at risk. Please be advised that this podcast may cover sensitive topics such as gendered violence. We understand that these discussions can be difficult to listen to. If you feel uncomfortable or need support, we encourage you to prioritize your well-being. Consider exploring our other podcasts if these topics are triggering for you. Resources can be found in the description.
Well, hi, and welcome to the HERHealth podcast. I'm Alexandria Lozochek, a master's student in community health sciences, specializing in public and population health at the University of Calgary. I also work at the Child Studies Lab, where we focus on research that supports children's lifelong developmental health. In this episode, we're joined by Dr. David Lindenbach, Director of Research at HERHealth Services and Adjunct Assistant Professor of Psychiatry at the University of Calgary. Dr. Lindenbach leads a community-based research program focused on preventing and treating developmental trauma using a transdiagnostic approaches. His problem-focused research not only improves care locally at HERHealth Services, but also generates knowledge that helps move the entire youth mental health field forward. Thank you so much, David, for joining me today. I truly appreciate it.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm very grateful to be here.
Great to hear. To start us off, can you share a bit about your background and what drew you so much to this research and practice in youth mental health, particularly within the child welfare system?
Yeah, I started my career in social services, working with people who were experiencing homelessness and severe mental illness, both youth and adults. Many of the clients I was working with were on, 10 or 20 different drugs to treat the mental health issues, prescription drugs to treat the mental health issues they were experiencing, and then drugs to treat the side effects of the drugs to treat their mental health issues. And I remember just thinking, there has to be a better way. We have got to get some better drugs here. And so I went and, I'd been involved in scientific research. And so I decided that the best way that I was going to have an impact was by getting involved in drug research. And so I did a PhD in behavioral neuroscience and then later a postdoctoral fellowship in psychiatry at the University of British Columbia. And, investigating drug therapies and brain stimulation in laboratory animals. And eventually I realized that my work had become very disconnected from clinical care, and I wanted to do research that was having a direct impact on clients and on people's health. And so I returned to my roots. I went back to social science and social services, but this time as a researcher rather than as a frontline provider. So in 2018, I took a position at University of Calgary as a research associate, doing work really with youth mental health in the community, trying to implement different evidence-based practices in community settings, and trying to really use research to directly improve clinical care in a very tangible way. And it's been a tremendous privilege. I really am so grateful for this opportunity. In 2023, I moved full-time to Whole Services to start my own research program and picked up a faculty position at the University of Calgary. And it's just been an incredible opportunity and just a ton of fun to really to work on some tangible problems in the community. I really feel, it sounds cheesy, but I swear to you that it's true. I feel like my head is in academics, but my heart will always be with nonprofits. So I really feel like I found my place with this role.
Thank you so much for diving into that background. I wanted to say just a beautiful combination of both your previous work experience at the very beginning as well as your education joining together to improve community, which is really important and something that we really emphasize in AVA as well. How do we improve community through research, through education? So thank you for diving in. I truly appreciate it. And kind of going back into more the psychotherapy talk, cognitive behavioral therapy, also really commonly known as CBT, is kind of considered the gold standard in this field. So for listeners who may not be really familiar, could you briefly explain what transdiagnostic CBT is? And I pulled a quote from you saying that it's and why it is the greatest hits album of CBT.
Yeah. So one of the issues, so CBT, is a fantastic approach, and it provides a lot of benefits to a lot of clients in specific situations. And it's really one of the things that we've learned over the last 20 years is it can help treat a variety of mental health issues that from anxiety, depression, obsessive compulsive disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder. It really has quite a robust evidence base. But one of the problems is that there were so many different variations of it that its success actually started to be a problem in that people were creating so many different manuals and so many different versions to treat so many different psychiatric disorders. And it just became really hard for a clinician to actually keep up and to learn 27 different versions of cognitive behavioral therapy to use for all the different diagnoses and all the different clients that they see. So transdiagnostic CBT, it is really attempting to create a greatest hits version of CBT to sort of unify all of these different protocols into a singular protocol. So the one that we work with is called the unified protocol because that is what it is trying to do, is pull together all the different forms of CBT. And I will say, I do love CBT. I do a lot of research with CBT, but it's one of those things where I feel like it has a really strong evidence base because it is easy to standardize and manualize and deliver in a systematic way. And that lends itself very well to a lot of the sort of Western scientific approaches that we use. And so that means that it generates a very strong evidence base. And so a lot of people, including myself, maybe a few years ago, I would have said it's the best psychotherapy. I'm not so confident in that read anymore. I think it is definitely the best supported evidence-based practice, but it may be one of those things where because it is so easy to standardize, it's easy to study, which means it's easy to generate good evidence for, which means it gets used a lot, which means we generate more evidence for it. And to some extent, I think in science, sometimes we study the things that are easier to study rather than the things that are the best idea to study. Any therapy that is going to be hyper individualized is going to be harder to study from a scientific perspective, even though it might actually be a better choice in a lot of cases. But it's that I think the point what I'm trying to say here is that although there is a very strong evidence base for CBT, a lot of it is because CBT was set up to develop a strong evidence base.
Especially since it developed out of a Western framework or a Western way of knowing, it definitely lends itself to be studied in a very particular lens, and that sometimes you need to step back and see in the context of which we are, and like using CBT to investigate, is there ways that we could make this more tailored to a specific setting or a specific context? Which leads very well into my next question, that you've been leading work at Hull Services to very much adapt and implement CBT in different specialized settings. And I'm curious if you can describe how you've tailored CBT for different programming, including like your therapeutic campus-based care, exceptional needs schooling, and your family-based Indigenous programs.
Yeah. Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that we've done is we've just done a lot of interviews and focus groups with staff, with caregivers, with kids, with content experts, both before and after implementation of CBT in a particular program. After every cohort, we do interviews and focus groups to try to see if there are ways that we can make further improvements. And, from an academic perspective, we would say, oh, we're using like a learning health system approach where we're making adjustments based on what works or what doesn't. But honestly, it's also just kind of how clinical care is normally done. You learn what works and what doesn't, and you keep making adaptations. So just to share a few examples, for kids in our campus-based care programs, which that's campus-based care is the term we use in Alberta. Residential care is the more commonly used international term. It's for kids who are in the child welfare system who have significant emotional or behavioral issues that make it so they can't live in maybe a community setting. They'll live in a campus-based care setting while we try to kind of stabilize their behaviors and equip them with the tools they need to transition back into a community setting, typically a foster home or an adoptive placement, but sometimes back with their biological family. And in those cases, most of the time when you're administering CBT with kids, it's going to be 50% working with the kids and 50% working with the caregivers. But what do you do if a kid's in campus-based care and they don't always have stable, long-term, healthy relationships with caregivers? Maybe they have limited or no involvement with their biological parents, or maybe they've kind of lived with some extended family for a few years. Maybe they lived with foster family for a few years. How the CBT manuals are all assuming that you're going to have this parent who's been with the kid their whole life and who has a really strong relationship with them and who knows them really well. What do you do if you don't have that? Half your therapy goes out the window before you've even started. It's a huge challenge. So we've worked with the staff to try to fill some of those roles of caregivers, to try to get them to practice the content with the kids outside of the session, because that's one of the things. If you're taking part in a 1 hour therapy per week, there's 148 hours in a week. Somebody has to reinforce that content during the other 147 hours. It's like if you're going to physical therapy or something, like maybe you're at your appointment once a week, but if you don't practice those skills outside of that 1 hour per week, you're not going to get better. And it's the same deal with CBT and with the kids that we work with. Like, you need to consistently practice those skills. So we've had to find creative ways to help train and support staff to practice skills with the kids outside of sessions. Um, yeah, that's kind of one example there.
Mhm. You've emphasized that many challenges in the welfare system, such as that caregivers may not necessarily be a child's parent or a legal guardian at the time. And you were talking a little bit about implementation science, barriers and facilitators. I like to use obstacles and opportunities as a
Well,
little,
that's a great term. I
just a
love it.
little bit, just so it's a little bit more broad. Because yes, you did mention barriers and facilitators is very implementation science heavy and not the most broad or open. But so I'm very curious as to some more unique challenges youth experience in the child welfare system face and how this like adapted unified CPT approaches may better support their needs.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And utilizing a lot of kind of movement-based approaches and rhythmic pieces, having youth, um, engage in certain activities like drumming, or we've used skateboarding as well, kind of pattern, repetitive, rhythmic activities to support their self-regulation is really, really important, because a lot of youth in the child welfare system, if they've experienced complex trauma at a young age, they will have very often pretty low levels of distress tolerance, and lower levels of distress tolerance than would be normal for a kid their age. And so, but you can use, if you can kind of incorporate more physical activity, incorporate more patterned, repetitive, rhythmic movement, that can support their self-regulation and give them the ability to sit through a session. And incorporating a lot of breaks, um, just to give them the tools to be able to work through a session. Because CBT, and this is one of the issues with CBT, is it's very cognitive. It requires a pretty good understanding of your own emotions and how like insights about yourself and insights about others. You can develop that. And a lot of what you do during CBT is to develop those skills, but youth need to have to be starting at a certain level in order to be able to benefit from cognitive behavioral therapy. So it also means that sometimes some of the youth we work with are maybe just never going to be appropriate for CBT. Or sometimes we'll need to scaffold certain skills in place first before they're ready for CBT. So that's sort of from a clinical perspective. From a research perspective, there's a lot of barriers to working with youth in the child welfare system as well. Mostly just the layers of approval that are needed. With our work, with some of the work that we're describing during the presentation, we'll have, you obviously need your approval from the University Ethics Board. We also signed agreements with the Alberta Ministry of Children and Family Services, because we had to get a lot of the youth were in, they're in government care. And so their legal guardian is a caseworker. And so we need a caseworker to consent for them. And the caseworker can't consent unless there's a formal agreement with the government. We also, as I was talking about, we did a lot of work in the schools as well. And so then we also needed agreements with the Calgary Board of Education. So it's really, I think navigating the layers of approval that are needed is a very daunting barrier for a lot of researchers and is one of the reasons why there isn't always a lot of research done in this field. But I think in our case, we've really done a lot to bring Hull Services and University of Calgary together. Our research program is jointly led by people at University of Calgary and Hull Services, and we have really strong buy-in from leadership on both sides. And so what that does is it enables us to do research together that wouldn't necessarily be possible if each of us was working separately.
I'm just writing this down. Thank you so much for diving into barriers in terms of reflexivity skills and how CBT might not account for that in different children, and how we have to consider more movement and rhythmic patterns of behavior in children when we're discussing CBT, as well as the institutional barriers that exist in all areas of life. So schools, universities, governments, and just how that setbacks children getting the support that they need to transition into the community. And thank you again for kind of talking about Hull's services partnership with the University of Calgary as that research together and like fighting a common goal with different institutions and social services is really powerful and is something that many individuals should consider as working and partnering with nonprofits and collaborative ways to get similar goals, to have a shared goal. I'm trying to think to say that the shared goal is done together and that we're helping community together. Okay, thank you for my little rant. You really much emphasize that both very local impact and generating knowledge that can move the broader field forward, very much a knowledge mobilization way of thinking. Can you kind of share an example of how your research at Hull has informed practice in real time?
Yeah. Some of the so just talking about CBT and some of the things that we've learned that has supported our ability to use CBT here at Hull Services. So we use a number of different models for our kids depending on where they're at, their developmental stage, and what they need. But CBT is one of those models. And so we've helped. Our research has helped with a few things. So first of all, for kids in campus-based care, identifying when the best time to engage kids in CBT is. And that does appear to be kind of around that transition point. I was mentioning kids will usually stay for a year and a half in our campus-based care programs. Then we transition them into the community. So identifying when the best time to use CBT is, which is around that transition point, because they've had time to develop a lot of basic self-regulation skills that are needed, and emotion awareness skills, but also it supports the transition because that transition point is a key point where things can break down. And if things break down, that's tremendously demoralizing for the kid. Because they're so excited to be able to live with the family again. Having caregivers work together with kids, and I mean caregivers in the community, like a foster family, adoptive family, maybe a kinship family, to work together with the kid to build a set of skills. They get to work together on concrete skills that are scaffolded from easier to harder. And that's really something that kind of builds bonds between them, between the caregiver and the child, and just helps them work on shared priorities, develop shared priorities, and work on those shared priorities. That has been very helpful for supporting that transition and in identifying what's needed for caregivers as well. One of the key things that came out from our work was that caregivers whose kids are in campus-based care really felt like they got a lot of peer support from taking part in a group like this. You can imagine, only 0.08% of kids in Alberta are in campus-based care, and that's pretty similar. It's one in several thousand, pretty much no matter where you are. And so most parents who have a kid in campus-based care aren't going to know anyone else who has a kid in campus-based care, in residential care, right? And so there's a lot of shame and blame and people feeling like, well, if your kid's struggling this hard, it must be because of something you did, right? And so that's something that our parents and our caregivers really struggle with, is that shame and that judgment. And so one of the things that came out of the interviews we did was that they really appreciated the peer support function of the groups and getting to feel like I'm not alone. There are other parents who are in the same struggles as me, and that's been one of the reasons why we've started to actually utilize a peer support program for caregivers in campus-based care. This program, it was designed as a CBT program, and the caregivers also got some peer support benefits. And so we kind of took that knowledge and have started to trial out just dedicated peer support groups for parents whose kids are in care here, because that's something that they seem to want and need.
How wonderful that they've all gotten a chance to do like this peer support came out as like a need talking to other individuals, caregivers in that situation. How like I just was so fascinated how like just those little things that you notice when have doing qualitative interviews then leads into other supportive programs. I think that's just wonderful. And talking about kind of implementing new therapeutic models in community is never really an easy task. So I'm curious on what kind of lessons you've learned about adapting CBT in collaboration with frontline staff, caregivers, and the youth themselves.
Yeah, fundamentally, I believe it is about listening and being flexible. Because you have to talk to a lot of people. You got to talk to the staff, you got to talk to the clients, you got to talk to content experts, and trying to get everyone to agree on a singular study design is complicated. Trying to understand what are the needs, priorities, was that phrase you used, opportunities and challenges? Was that um,
Obstacles, but yeah, same thing.
obstacles and challenges? There you go. Or yeah, obstacles and opportunities. But trying to just like really listening skills, I think, are one of the key things that's most important in community-based work, because you have to integrate the perspectives of a lot of different interest holders and um, come up with something that everybody can engage in and be interested in and agree to. And that is something that's not always easy and is not always something that I think as academics that we're trained to do. I think we often want to, a lot of academics will maybe want to run a particular study design. And I've certainly been in that situation. I'm often still in that situation of I have a particular study design that I would like to run. But it doesn't always work out like that. You have to kind of figure out what is possible and what is going to meet everyone's needs, and how trying to find something that everybody can agree to and everybody can be happy with. That is that is one of the big challenges of this type of work.
Mm, definitely. I'm working on a for my thesis, talking to leaders at different nonprofit organizations about their past experiences with research collaborations or research partners. And pretty much what you've been saying is very important. And a lot of the leaders have been highlighting it's like we want to be listened to, we want to feel like equal partners, and that this is a collaborative approach. And so it's something that we could all agree on to reach our goals. So I'm really glad to hear that what I'm hearing on your end is very similar to what I'm hearing from the nonprofit end. So it all lines up appropriately. And beyond treatment, you've also really much looked into staff wellness and reflective practices. And I'm curious as to why supporting staff is such a critical piece of effective youth mental health care.
Yeah, I mean, the child welfare sector is a hard sector to work in. It has very high rates of physical and psychological injury, and that creates issues for the competency and stability of the workforce. A lot of people leave the child and youth care workforce a few years after they enter it. I think it's comparable to nursing in that way. It's just the field has a lot of burnout, it has a lot of attrition. And so, but if you really want to support youth who've experienced adversity to realize their full potential, and I believe that's fundamental if we want to live in a just and equitable society, then we have to support the caregivers. I'm a new parent, and one thing that I've learned is that probably every parent who's listening knows is that you can't do the best for your child unless you yourself are well. If you yourself are unwell, you can't support the kids in your life in the best way possible. And so I really believe that in order to provide our kids with the best care possible, we also need to make sure that we're supporting our staff as much as we can.
Definitely. And as you did mention, we do have a lot of nurses on our team, so we always like to have conversations about burnout. And I have a lot of nurses friends talking about how, yeah, burnout is very real. And they recommend having an exit plan out of the field, which is very unfortunate, but just how much our system isn't there to like support the people that are social services or our nurses as well as they could be. So thank you for emphasizing how that we need to fill our cups first sometimes sorry, that we need to fill our cups before we fill the cups of our social circles and our teams and our communities. So thank you for diving into that. I truly appreciate it. And David, a question I like to ask is that looking forward, what are some next steps for your research? And I'm really curious about what gives you hope for this field of youth mental health in Canada.
Yeah. So I'm 39 and I'm old enough to have seen a lot of progress in my own lifetime. People are more tolerant and accepting of people who are different from them than I remember growing up as a kid in the 90s. As a society, I think we're better at embracing differences between people than we were 20 or 30 years ago. And I think a lot of this is driven by young people. My sense is that a lot of the progress that we've made with equity in terms of gender identity and sexuality has been driven by young people. And I just hope that I learn so much from the young people that I work with, and I am continually inspired by the young people that I work with. And I just hope that as I grow older and more out of touch, that I don't lose my appreciation for what the youth can teach us.
Definitely. Thank you so much for having this conversation with me today. I truly appreciate it. Was there anything that you would like to add that we didn't have time to discuss today or that I didn't ask?
No, I think that's it. I really appreciate the opportunity and thank you so much for the wonderful work that you do.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for joining us on the HERHealth podcast, transforming health for women and girls at risk. Remember, your health matters, and together we can make a difference. Until next time, remember to prioritize your health and well-being. For more resources and support on issues affecting girls, women, and gender-diverse people, visit our website at avatraining.ca. This is Dr. Nicole Letourneau. Thank you for listening.